Hello everybody. As you can see from the title, here we go again. This is part 2 of my winter in France 2010. I wasn't sure if there would be a part 2, but part 1 seems to have been received quite well. I think there's only like 2 thumbs down on it. 275 or so thumbs up, which is the part that I prefer to look at. So we will carry on, and this one shouldn't be anywhere near as long, but I arrived the end of March in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and I had over 2 weeks, I guess. I didn't fly home until the 16th of April, so I had to find something to do with my time. That part of the trip wasn't planned because I thought I would still be walking if we'd been able to start from Le Puy. Might have had a few extra days, but I would have walked a lot of that 2-week period, but we didn't get to do that part, so had to rearrange my plans. I spent a couple of days just relaxing after the walk, enjoying Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and the view that you're looking out there is just the view out of the little pension where I stayed at the back. The backyard was sort of terraced. Very nice people. I enjoyed staying there. I did some research to see where I could go next, and I've always wanted to see the Canadian War Memorial at Vimy Ridge. Is a famous battle from the First World War. Thousands of Canadians died in the battle, and there's a beautiful war memorial there, which you may have seen. I've used the pictures of it for Remembrance Day on a couple of my different clips on here. But to get there, it's almost planes, trains, and automobiles. No plane involved, but we got just about everything else. I had to take a bus to Bayonne, which is the only way out of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. They don't have a train station. And from Bayonne, I took a TGV, a train de grande vitesse, a fast train to Paris Montparnasse station. And from there, I take the metro across Paris to Gare du Nord, and catch another train to Arras, A-R-R-A-S. They don't pronounce the S on the end, I guess, where I could finally catch a train to Vimy. But I became concerned because I could not find anything on the internet for accommodations at Vimy. So I went as far as Arras, and then I went to the information desk at the train station and inquired, and they said, no, there isn't any accommodation at Vimy. It's a very small town. So I made reservations at a hotel and stayed 2 nights in Arras and waited until the next day to carry on by train to Vimy very early in the morning. So I enjoyed doing some wandering around in Arras. This is Grand Place. Arras and Brussels, Belgium, both have town squares that they call Grand Place, and they look very similar. I have to check every time I look at the photographs that I've taken to know which one it is. It's a nice little town. I really enjoyed being there. A church. I don't know which one because I don't think I went in. I was just roaming around in the day waiting to call it a day so I could get up early the next morning and head for Vimy. However, like any good French town, there was wonderful bakeries. This one was really exceptional. We were getting close to Easter, so you can see a lot of the little things there sort of have an Easter theme to them. Bunny rabbit faces and such, I think. Don't recall if I went in there and bought anything or not. I must have. I could never have resisted not going in. Well, early the next morning, I took the train to Vimy, only to discover that when I got to Vimy, the Vimy Memorial is not actually in Vimy. It's on Vimy Ridge, and no taxis or anything, so it was quite a long walk, but well worth it. I'm so glad that I finally got to see the memorial. I was very early in the season, so the nice little Café Yvable, the Maple Cafe with Canadian flags all over it, was not open. I assume it's just open during the tourist season when more Canadian visitors would be there. The several hundred acres of the site is land that is forever Canada. It was given by the grateful nation of France to the Canadian government, and it is now officially Canadian soil. The centennial of the battle was last year in 2017, and a great deal of the area here has been left completely undisturbed. The trenches, whatever, the places where the shells landed and blasted out big holes, the holes in the mounds are still there. They put the memorial in, but they left the rest of it as it was. Trees have grown and whatever, but there are signs in areas like this that tell you not to walk off into this area because there could be unexploded ordnance. It's a very impressive piece of architecture. I don't recall the name of the designer, but it stands out. You see it from a long ways off. Two columns with many figures, carved statues and whatever in and around it, and all the names of the war dead are carved into the wall around it. Very, very impressive. Very emotional, I found it, for a Canadian, I guess, being there when you realize that so many Canadians lost their lives in that battle. This is the center of it, between the two columns. So many of the graves are marked like this: a soldier of the Great War, known unto God. Uh, it was just a body. They know by the uniform that it was a Canadian, but they don't know who the dead person was. So that's the way they're marked. The graves are marked. Very interesting. Not the Canadian unknown soldier. I don't think came from Vimy, but the body was repatriated from France a number of years ago now, probably more than a decade ago. And this is what his headstone was like. The unknown soldier's grave is at the Canadian National War Memorial in Ottawa, but that headstone from his grave was placed in the National War Museum. And our Remembrance Day service takes place on the 11th day of the 11th month, the 11th hour, which is the official signing of the armistice of World War One, the official time when the guns were supposed to stop firing. That headstone is positioned opposite a window, and on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, the beam of sunlight comes through that window and lights up that headstone. I have never been to see it. I have never been to the National War Memorial Service. I would be torn between the two things if I ever got there. Would I stay to see the War Memorial Service, or would I go to the the War Museum, to see that event happen? There are several cemeteries, Canadian war dead, in the area. I visited a couple of them before I left. Very, very impressive. At this particular cemetery, I was just about to leave when at the gate there was a little wooden box with a door, and I opened it, and inside was a register of the graves. And I wondered if there might have been a Calder there, and there was just one. John Calder is his name, J.D. on the headstone, and there's a plot there, a plan that shows you where each grave is. So I went back and took a photograph of the only Calder at that particular cemetery. There, as I said, there are several cemeteries. I don't know if there might have been others or not. It was a very enjoyable day, and as I say, quite emotional, but I'm so glad that I was able to do it. Last year, children from the school here traveled to France and went to Vimy Ridge. I'm not certain if they were there for the commemoration service on the actual centennial or not, but a large group of children from the school here got to go and see the memorial anyway. I had never been to Belgium or to Brussels before, so I decided I would take a side trip to Brussels. It's just a park in the city. Window shopping there was interesting. It was full of Belgian lace. I didn't buy any. Very expensive for the authentic thing. I mean, you can get reproductions, but the actual hand-done lace, of course, is very expensive. Hundreds of hours to make a piece. I mentioned Grand Place Arras, and the next few photographs here are Grand Place Brussels. And as I said, I always get the two mixed up when I'm looking at my pictures. I can't decide which is which. Architecture to me looks very similar. And wherever I go, I have to try to find a bakery, of course. They just seem to find me. I don't think this was traditional Belgian fare. I think it might have been some ethnic community, Arab maybe or something, but it was certainly beautiful. I took a tour of the city in one of those hop-on, hop-off buses. This is the Atomium, which was part of the 1958 Brussels World Fair. It represents a molecule of iron. Very tall, and in these pictures I cannot find the cables. They must have been on the other side of it. You see where the Belgian flag is on the very top? Well, you could come out through a hole up there, and they had cables going down to the ground, and people were doing a zip line from up there. Made me sick just to look at it. A very interesting structure, though. I didn't go inside. There's like a tourist trap, a gift shop or whatever. I just walked around outside and enjoyed the structure. It's been there since 1958 and is still looking quite new. This is a royal palace, although the royal family doesn't live in it. I didn't take a tour, but it's open to the public certain days of the week. In my last picture of Brussels, I thought this contrasted the old and the new quite nicely. These older buildings with that enormous black skyscraper behind them. Well, I moved on to Calais on the English Channel. La Manche, I guess is what they call it in French. This is the lighthouse, which is a very impressive structure. But what fascinated me about it is it really isn't on the coast. It's sort of in the middle of the town. I guess the important thing is it can be seen from the water. Down by the docks, there were these men, stop the deportations and whatever, written on the building there. They were Afghani refugees. And I think most of them are trying to get across the channel to England. England doesn't want them, and neither does France. I talked with one of them. They're very nice people, of course. They've just escaped the misery of Afghanistan after what George Bush turned it into, a wasteland. Calais is a very pretty city. And after being down south where it was so cold and miserable, I was surprised to find so many lovely spring flowers in northern France. The sculpture is outside of the city hall, which I never could decide what it might have been supposed to be depicting, but it was a large bronze sculpture anyway. City Hall, which in Calais is called a mairie. In France, you have a choice. Your city hall is a mairie or it's an hotel de ville. I've asked several times and nobody can tell me why. One place has one, another place has the other. Flowers were just beautiful at their peak, actually. moved on to the seaside, down on the beach. That's one of the ferry boats getting ready to go over to England. The water was full of them. I guess there had been a strike, and this was the first day of a week or so that the ferries hadn't been running, so making up for lost time, evidently. If I ever go to England from France again, it will be by ferry. I would never take that tunnel. And I did not shop in this butcher shop. I don't shop in butcher shops anyway, but this one was a butcher shop that specializes in selling horse meat. The next day I took the train to Paris, decided I would spend the last week of my vacation in Paris and the surrounding areas. It's only a short train ride. I was at the hotel by 11. I have a great story that goes along with this little hotel. I have stayed there, I don't know, numerous times. It's a small family-run, family-owned hotel. Give you an idea of how small it is. That sort of garage door thing off to the right, that's another business that was closed when I took this photograph. And to the left, where you see La Forêt, that's a real estate office. The hotel is those 2 windows wide and 5 stories high. 3, maybe 4 rooms on the floor. I'm not exactly certain, but it is not a huge hotel, that's for sure. I think maybe a 2-star classification. Sort of the hotel where your average middle-class French person traveling would stay. There were always traveling businessmen in there and what have you. No dining room. It has a little breakfast room where they serve you croissant, coffee, and juice in the morning. I think that's complimentary along with your room. But my story about the place is, it's like one of these movies where the movie star goes in and is recognized by the people in the hotel. I've stayed there so many times that I know the owners. I don't think I've ever met the wife, if she's alive or whatever. I've never asked, but the owner and his 2 sons do everything in there. There are ladies that clean rooms. I don't know if one of them might be the mother or not, but as I say, I've stayed there numerous times, and when I register each time now, it's a chat because they recognize me and I'm back again. But my story about them is that quite possibly, if it hadn't been for that hotel, I wouldn't be able to tell any more stories. I had been in Italy, I think. Took a 13-hour train ride, I think, from somewhere in Italy all the way to Paris on a relatively slow train. And I didn't get up and walk around very much because the only place to put my suitcase was right next to one of the doors where you would exit that particular car or the train that I was on. And this was a slow train stopping all the time. I just felt that there was a good chance of someone grabbing my suitcase and going out through the door with it, so I kept an eye on it. However, the following day in this hotel, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just can't tell you how I felt. I don't really recall how I felt, but I just knew I had to get dressed and get out of the room and get downstairs. I went down to the lobby, and the man who owns the hotel was on night duty that night. And I just explained to him that I'm just not feeling very well. I stepped outside on the sidewalk and got some fresh air. When I came back in, I must have passed out. And I remember coming to once or twice in the lobby. He called an ambulance and he took me to a hospital or whatever. I spent 12 hours anyway in one of Paris's best hospitals, which fortunately for me is not very far from that particular hotel. And the diagnosis was that it probably was an embolism, pulmonary embolism that I got from sitting in one position so long on that train. They never did find the embolism. The doctor said, it had dissolved and they didn't find it or whatever, but that was the best diagnosis that they could give me anyway. So if it hadn't been for the gentleman on the front desk, I don't know if I would have made it or not. While I'm on the topic, I'll put in a good comment for the French medical system in that hospital. a male nurse, at least I think he was a nurse, he wasn't one of the doctors anyway. They sent him in to talk to me quite a bit because he spoke good English. I speak French, but not the best of French, and my mind wasn't working well enough to be coping very well in the French language, so he dealt with me a lot. Several times when I was talking to him, I would tell him that I have insurance. I've got travel insurance. The card is back at the hotel. And he kept saying, is anybody asking you for money? Don't worry about it. Anyway, I was there. I had a CAT scan. I had numerous blood tests. 3 or 4 specialists saw me, all that good stuff. I was there for about 12 hours. And I never did get anybody that wanted to talk about money or insurance or papers or anything. I was just admitted and they took care of me. Social medicine at its best, like we have here in Canada as well. When I was ready to leave, they were discharging me to go back to the hotel. They always take you in a wheelchair, even in France. The lady pushing the wheelchair said that they want to see you in the administration office, and I thought, well, here comes the bill. So she wheels me into this administration office, and the man sitting behind the desk hands me an enormous envelope. 2 feet by 1.5 feet. And he said, that's your x-rays, a copy of all your blood tests, a CD of your CAT scan for you to give to your doctor when you get back home. I thanked him, and I said, what about the bill? I said, I thought perhaps you would want to see the insurance papers or something. He said, don't worry about it. We've got your address. You'll get a bill. That was it. I left. I did. I got a bill when I got back home, and my insurance covered it completely. It didn't cost me a cent. Well, you've looked at the side of that hotel long enough. Let's take a look around Paris. This is Montmartre, where the church is called Sacré-Cœur, built in and around 1900. When it was built, it wasn't really liked very much by Parisians. They said it looked like a wedding cake. I think it's more appreciated now. It's quite a landmark. I like the area because it's popular with artists. Some good and some not so good, and then there's those guys that chase you around wanting to draw your picture. I've never sat for one of those, but I love to walk around and look at the different paintings. Some of them quite reasonable, priced that is. And some really good talent there as well. Montmartre is only about a 10 or 15 minute walk from that little hotel where I stay. Directly across the street from the hotel is the Marché Saint-Quentin, which is an open market, I think 7 days a week, and it was designed by Gustave Eiffel, the same man who designed the Eiffel Tower. And the framework is cast iron, just like the Eiffel Tower is. A lovely market. Almost anything you could possibly want in there. Shopped in there for picnic lunches many times. Love to pack a little lunch and have it on a park bench somewhere. Everything from flowers to fruit, vegetables, meat, cheese, it's all there. I'll move at a faster pace through some of the main attractions in Paris. If I slowed down, this video would go on forever. But if there's one that interests you and you want to see, you can always pause the video and have a closer look at it. This, of course, is Notre Dame de Paris, taken from the river, I think. I was probably on one of the river boats at the time. This is Tour Saint-Jacques. If you're going to walk the Camino from your home in Paris, you start at Tour Saint-Jacques. This is the Pompidou Center, an art gallery, modern. I must admit I've never been inside. I keep meaning to go in and get a ticket and see what's in there, but I've never been in the Pompidou Gallery. This is Place des Vosges, a place that fascinates me. I go there every time I'm in Paris. It's an enclosed square. 17th century or 18th century, I'm not certain. Lots of unique little gift shops and restaurants and whatever. You walk around the entire square under this covered arcade. And in the center of the square is a park. Something about it fascinates me. I have to go back and see it every time I'm there. Just a Paris street view in the old part of the city without all of the high-rises. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that was Place de Bastille. This is the bateau bus, an excellent way to get around Paris, unless it happens to be marathon weekend. You see those people there, probably 200 or 300 people lined up? Well, there was only 1 or 2 people got off the boat, and that was all the boat could take. This is the next day. I took the boat the following day, and this is the marathon going through Paris. Segways. You can take a tour on Segway. I've never had the nerve to try it yet. I want to every time I see it, and I think, oh no, you'd be the one that get hit by a bus. There are 2 of these buildings, one either side of the street, Grand Palais and Petit Palais. I think that was Grand Palais. They were used in an 1890-something or other exhibition in Paris, and they still use them. That's decoration, chubby little guys on the side of the building. And this is looking up at the roof inside of Grand Palais. Glass, we can see the French flag flying on the roof. This is a statue to St. Michael, one of the patron saints of France. The Eiffel Tower, of course. And this is on the Champs-Élysées. Lovely spring flowers again. I must have been in a safe crosswalk, I hope, anyway, because this picture is taken from the middle of the Champs-Élysées. Arc de Triomphe, at the end of the Champs-Élysées. And this is the ceiling in Galerie Lafayette, a shopping center. Art Deco glass ceiling. Incredible. When I'm in Paris, I have to go see if this boat is still there. I think so far I've walked past it at least 3 times. It's owned by somebody from Fredericton, New Brunswick, about a 3-hour drive from my home. I wondered if it was actually from New Brunswick. It has a New Brunswick flag on the stern of it. And one day there was a young man washing his car next to it. And he said, yes, I don't own it, but the owners allow me to stay in it. Off to the Louvre. Somehow I managed to get a ticket. I can't remember how, because I didn't have it in advance. The Pyramide du Louvre. Inside, looking out through the pyramid. And this is the, down below the pyramid, the inverted pyramid inside. A couple of interesting photographs. That's an actual photograph, of course, you can tell. And then I have an app that you can turn a photograph into a cartoon with. And that's the same photograph turned into a cartoon. And I colored in the 2 little boys, the same colors that they were in the photograph. Sculpture inside the Louvre. I'm always fascinated by sculpture. Couldn't tell you the name of any of these pieces. And a student drawing from one of the sculptures. The Louvre was a royal palace before it was a museum, and after the revolution some of the early emperors stayed there. This is the apartment of Napoleon III, which they have left as it was. fabulous, as you can see. And the last shot is the pyramid looking out through one of the windows inside the Louvre. Well, if you're still there, you've survived to the end. On my last day, I went out and met a friend of mine, Prue's husband, Yvonne, and we spent part of the day at Versailles. These are just a few pictures taken outside of the Chateau of Versailles. Had dinner and all that good stuff, and then I went back to get a early night's sleep for my flight back to Canada the following morning on the 16th of April. So I hope you enjoyed this little presentation of slides, and this concludes my winter in France in 2010. I'd like to thank you very much for staying with me and watching through to the end.